The sun never sets on the British Empire. At its peak, the British Empire was so vast that their reign spanned over 1/3 of the world population. And it was always daytime at some place in their kingdom. And for a time, it never set on British motorcycles either. At its peak, British motorcycles ruled everything. They won races, broke records, and became symbols of rebellion across the globe. If you rode British. Hollywood rode them, racers worshipped them, the world wanted them. And then, in less than 20 years, it all vanished. How do you lose an empire? How do you go from total dominance to extinction? This is the story of Britain's golden motorcycle era. The rise, the rebellion, the arrogance, and the fall that no one saw coming. Things kicked off in the early 1900s, when road racing was banned on the mainland. But manufacturers still needed a place to test their machines. That need led to the birth of one of the most prestigious motorcycle races in the world, the Isle of Man TT. Right off the bat, the TT became the Olympics of motorcycling, a brutal, twisting road course where manufacturers could prove their machines were the best. Every year, companies showed up with something faster, stronger brakes, better suspension, lighter frames. Each innovation was born from one question: how do we win? By the 1930s, one name stood above the rest: Norton. Their international model dominated the island, piloted by legends like Stanley Woods and Jimmy Guthrie. The TT had become the motorcycling's mecca. And it wasn't just race bikes. Britain was building incredible road machines too. The Ariel Square 4 cylinders arranged in a perfect square, smooth as silk. The BSA Gold Star, which earned its name by hitting 100 miles per hour at Brooklands and became a street legend. And Bra Superior, which was so fast and exclusive that it was called the Rolls-Royce of the motorcycles. Even T.E. Lawrence, the real Lawrence of Arabia, owned one. It was his most prized possession. Then came Triumph. They stumbled with the 6-1 in 1934, but struck gold with the Speed Twin in 1938. That 500cc parallel twin became the blueprint for modern motorcycles. And that design DNA, it would eventually evolve into one of the most famous names of all time, the Bonneville. Britain had built the foundation of what motorcycling would become.
At 3 o'clock tomorrow, in view of this fact, tomorrow, Tuesday, will be treated as Victory in Europe Day.
The industry truly peaked after World War II. If the Isle of Man TT was the Olympics, World War II was the real proving ground. During the war, Britain used motorcycles more than any other country to dispatch riders, scouts, even airborne troops had bikes dropped with them. By the time the war ended, the population was familiar with motorcycles in a way they never had been before. And when peace returned, the market was flooded with cheap, secondhand military bikes. When repainted and sold to the public, they gave ordinary people their first taste of motorcycling freedom. Then came the machines that would define a generation. The Vincent Black Shadow arrived in 1948, a 998 cubic centimeter monster that could hit 122 miles per hour, making it the fastest production motorcycle in the world. If most bikes were family sedans, the Black Shadow was a fighter jet. Its sibling, the Black Lightning, went even further, carrying Roland Raleigh free to a land speed record at Bonneville Salt Flats, famously lying flat in nothing but a bathing suit. That photo is still the most iconic image in motorcycling history. But the real magic wasn't just in performance, because after the war, there was a shift in the way people viewed motorcycles. Something changed in the culture. They were no longer just practical machines for commuting or delivery. They became symbols of freedom, rebellion, individuality. Young men embraced the leather jacket lifestyle. Motorcycling became a way of saying, I don't follow your rules. The 50s was the decade when British motorcycling officially arrived, both in terms of production and culture. British bikes were considered the best in the world, and they dominated the racetracks as well. With wins in events like the Clubman races, local circuits, and the Isle of Man TT, which at the time had become very prestigious, these events drove innovation as manufacturers constantly pushed to create faster, more reliable machines.
Yeah, hello? Yeah. It hasn't scared you?
No, no.
What do you like most of all? Women.
In 1953, Hollywood came calling, as Marlon Brando rode a Triumph Thunderbird in the Wild One, changing everything overnight. Triumph became the coolest thing on two wheels. Every kid wanted one, and it wasn't just Brando. Steve McQueen lived on his Triumph, while Elvis Presley and Bob Dylan constantly rode one. Compare that to Harley Davidson, which suddenly looked old and slow. British bikes were light, agile, fast, and they had style. In this decade, Britain owned the motorcycle world. Triumph, Norton, BSA, Ariel, Matchless, Vincent. These weren't just brands, they were legends, celebrated for performance, reliability, and looks that made you want to swing a leg over and just ride. But just as things looked unstoppable, something new was brewing, not in the factories but in the streets.
Now here's a car that obviously belongs to somebody who is somebody. It's the Austin A90, the Westminster.
See, as another decade came knocking, cars started getting cheaper, and adults jumped on this transition, abandoning their motorcycles for something more practical, leaving the bikes to the teenagers. And these kids, they had different ideas about what motorcycles were for. In the 60s, British motorbikes entered their most notorious era. Young riders, also known as rockers, gained a wild and unruly reputation. The media was filled with stories of these leather jacket-wearing bikers racing down bypasses at 100 miles per hour. Anyone who could go beyond 100 miles per hour was a ton-up boy. At just 16, you could get a bike, pass your test, and work your way up to a powerful 500cc motorcycle, which was the minimum requirement for hanging around the Ace Cafe, where every other cool 16-year-old kid hangs out. Now, the Ace wasn't glamorous. It was a greasy truck stop with nailed-down furniture and a jukebox that blasted rock and roll. But it sat right next to the North Circular Road, a stretch of tarmac perfect for illegal races. Riders would drop a coin in the jukebox, race to a point and back, and try to finish before the song ended. These became known as jukebox races. It was dangerous, reckless, and thrilling. Just the kind of thing rockers were looking for. Their motorcycles were stripped down, tuned-up machines designed for speed, with low handlebars and had rear-set footrests. And it had nothing to do with comfort. They were about looking fast and going faster. If you could hit 100 miles per hour, you joined the exclusive ton-up club. This kind of excitement and status was irresistible. The open road called to them, and the cafe racers answered in full throttle. To outsiders, these kids were hooligans. To the riders, they were living free. Think of them as the punk rockers of their time, hated by parents, glorified by their own tribe. Cafe racers may have been setting the fashion for quick and stylish machines, but the bike industry only had eyes for lucrative American exports. Any manufacturer, be it Triumph or Norton or anyone, never looked at the youngsters and asked them what they wanted. Cafe racers favored a certain type of bike. They were influenced by the styling and look of TT racers who, like them, raced on roads. But those bikes traditionally used single-cylinder engines. But rockers loved twin-cylinder engines that offered them what they wanted: quicker acceleration and performance. A motorcycle geared for the streets. But in 1959, the Bonneville T120 was launched, named after Triumph's speed record set at Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. It came with sporty American tinge styling, dual carburetors, and the kind of cool that defined an era. Ton-up boys loved it. Twin cylinders were their weapon of choice. You could tune them and go much faster. The young riders would buy whatever bike they could get their hands on, new if they were lucky, secondhand if they weren't, and then make it theirs. They dropped the handlebars, moved the footrest back, anything to get that perfect riding position where they could really tuck in and feel in control of all that power beneath them. But this golden era, it was already ending. Speed always has a price, and these cafe racers were paying it with their lives. In 1960 alone, nearly 14,000 riders under 24 were either killed or seriously injured. All those romantic stories about midnight races, they were hiding a pretty dark truth about what was actually happening on the roads near the Ace Cafe. The bodies kept piling up. By the time the 60s ended, the damage was done. The press had their story, society had made up its mind. Young guys on motorbikes meant trouble, violence, delinquency, the whole package. Every negative stereotype people had about motorcyclists just got worse. The magic around British motorcycles, gone. and nobody wanted anything to do with the rockers.
What you think of his driving, that's all he's bothered about, is getting past you, anywhere, at any place, at any time. You can bet he's the boy who's going to go flashing past with the throttle wide open. And you can bet you he's the boy in 6 months who's going to be in a coffin.
And that was a problem. Because while the press was demonizing British motorcycles at home, the manufacturers were betting everything on one market, America. Because that's where the money was. That's where the future was supposed to be. But they missed something. While Britain was chasing nostalgia and American export dollars, a quiet revolution was happening on the other side of the world. The Japanese were coming, and they weren't playing the same game. All that character British bikes had, it just meant they leaked oil and broke down. The Japanese had figured something out. Reliability matters. Bikes that started every morning. Bikes that got you to work without drama. Back in 1959, Honda had dropped the Super Cub. Small, cheap, boring. But it worked. Anyone could ride it. For years, that's all Honda was known for. Beginner bikes, nothing serious. Then 1965 happened. Honda released the CB450, the Black Bomber. And suddenly, people were paying attention. This thing was smooth, fast, and here's the kicker, it didn't break down every other week. It caught the eye of younger riders who actually cared about performance. The Black Bomber didn't set the world on fire, and Honda eventually pulled the plug on it. But it proved something important. Japanese bikes could hang with the Europeans. They had the engineering chops, the performance, and they cost less. Honda was no longer just the beginner bike company. The CB450 set the stage. And in 1969, Honda absolutely changed everything with the CB750. This bike is a legend. It kicked off the entire superbike era. A 736 cubic centimeter inline-4 engine, the first mass-produced disc brake, electric start. This wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary. The CB750 raised the bar so high that every other manufacturer had to scramble just to keep up. Innovate or die. That was the new reality, and it hit European brands, especially the British, like a freight train. The US market was Britain's lifeline after the rocker era killed their reputation at home. American riders still loved British bikes. But now, why buy a Norton that might leave you stranded when you could get a CB750 for the same price? A bike that was faster, more advanced, and actually reliable? Well, Norton tried. They launched the Commando in 1967, and it was genuinely good, probably the last great British bike. It had style, it had power, and for a moment it felt like maybe Britain could fight back. But it was too little, too late. By the late 70s, the British motorcycle industry was essentially dead. Ariel, gone. Velocette, gone. BSA, gone. Triumph was barely breathing. In a desperate move, the government forced BSA, Norton, and Triumph to merge into one company, Norton Villiers Triumph. It was life support for an industry that was already flatlined. It didn't work. The sun had set on the British Empire decades earlier. Now it was setting on British motorcycles too. So what went wrong? How did the country that invented the modern motorcycle lose everything? The market moved on from motorcycles to cars, and British manufacturers didn't adapt. Management was stubborn, resistant to change. Quality control was a joke. Union strikes crippled production, and maybe worst of all, arrogance. The British thought they'd always be on top, that their reputation alone would carry them. It didn't. Meanwhile, the Japanese weren't just building better bikes, they were building smarter businesses. Better engineering, better quality control, better prices. They listened to what riders actually wanted instead of what manufacturers thought they should want. The British didn't just lose, they got annihilated. But here's what matters. Despite everything. The failures, the arrogance, the collapse. The British started it all. Every motorcycle you see today carries British DNA. The parallel twin engine that powers most bikes? British invention. The cafe racer style that's everywhere now? Born in Britain. The idea that motorcycles aren't just transport but symbols of freedom and rebellion? That was Britain too. They walked so modern bikes could run. What Triumph and Norton represented back then, light, agile, fast, constantly pushing what's possible. That's what every world-class manufacturer is still chasing today. The British motorcycle industry died, but its spirit never did. It's in every twist of the throttle, every lean into a corner, every rider who feels that rush of freedom on two wheels. That's the legacy. And that's forever.